for the first time in 2023. Let's get started.
Another race for the world's greatest driver, Juan Manuel Fangio.
Former world champion Jim Clark leapt into the lead. That's Clark's Lotus going like a bomb.
And James Hunt is the world champion by just one single point.
By being a racing driver, you are under risk all the time. And if you no longer go for a gap that exists, you're no longer a racing driver.
And that is Michael Schumacher ahead, the world champion.
To become a four-time world champion, Sebastian Vettel, Lewis Hamilton, champion of the world.
That's for all the kids out there who dream the impossible.
Max Verstappen is champion of the world.
Oh my God! Max Verstappen, you are the world champion! The world champion!
Hello and welcome to episode 1 of F1 in Review of this season. I'm Tom Clabon and I'm joined by Tristan Fancourt and Angus Gallager at the start of yet another season of Formula 1. This season itself doesn't start for a number of weeks, but there's lots to discuss heading into this. We've got different liveries and designs that each team and constructor has chosen, along with a number of controversies, shall we say, concerning the FIA, the governing body. But first of all, the team principles. Just as we were wrapping up last season's series of F1 in Review for older listeners and indeed fans, shall I say, of this podcast series, we're signing off, as I say, and change was afoot, but change not this time when it came to the driver lineups. No, this was all sorted. It was down to the team principles of Ferrari, McLaren, Alfa Romeo and Williams, but to name but 4 teams there. First at Ferrari, we saw Alfa Romeo's Fred Vasseur move over there to replace Mattia Binotto. First of all then, Angus, your thoughts on that one?
An interesting appointment. I think we knew that Binotto was kind of out the door, didn't we? We knew that was going to be the case. Fred Vasseur, I think the scepticism of his appointment is a little bit harsh. People saying that he's a bit of a soft touch and he doesn't have that big team experience. But they forget that he has this track record of success in the junior formulae with ART Grand Prix in F2 and GP3. Also working alongside a certain Mr. Charles Leclerc. Could be handy. And also had a solid season with Alfa Romeo last year, bringing them up from what had been a poor couple of years beforehand in their couple of years as Sauber in the 2020s, but had a strong season with Alfa Romeo last season, and I don't think it'll be a move that brings necessarily immediate rewards, but I think over time it could be a shrewd appointment.
It's an interesting choice, I think, and one that we all predicted at the end. There was lots of rumours flying around with Fred Vasseur, and definitely proved himself a little bit. And isn't it nice to be back with such an interesting topic of team principles, given what's been going on behind the scenes, that the movement's been going there, and it's nice to be able to chat about it with some fellow F1 fans, because I've been rather lonely over the winter months by myself, no one to talk to about this sort of stuff. And with testing coming up, I feel like that's the moment we're going to finally see how impactful maybe the team principles will actually are going to be. Now, Fred Vasseur in particular, as Angus said just there, has had pretty good success in his previous role at Alfa Romeo and as Sauber, really, as they kind of are now, I guess, because of Audi coming into the sport. I feel like we need to caveat that now. It's Alfa Romeo, but making sure that we use the Sauber name as well, because I feel like Sauber's trying to make it themselves a bit more important. So Fred's had a bit of a promotion really now at Ferrari, and he's big friends with Leclerc, and he seems like quite a fun bloke. I watched the launch of the Ferrari, and they were very passionate about their direction and their way forward. Now Mattia Binotto's gone. Fred seemed pretty optimistic, and that's maybe say he hasn't been beaten down yet by the Ferrari brand, but to be honest, I think it's a pretty safe bet. And it is a bit bizarre that he is Ferrari's first non-Italian team boss since 2007. So maybe that's what they need. Maybe Ferrari was too Italian, and that's where it all went wrong. So maybe this is like a fresh start and an opportunity to move last year's season far away from them, allow Matteo Binotto to carry that particular sack of potatoes off with him.
See, to start with, I also thought that Fred Vasseur was very much a Ferrari man, being at Alfa Romeo for so long and being part of what essentially is part of their B team strategy along with Haas there. But I looked back at his history and saw that he's actually a team principal of Renault before he went to Sauber, so maybe not the sort of born and bred Ferrari man that perhaps Matteo Binotto was, so maybe not as much of a safe bet or as much as a hiring from within as we originally thought. But in terms of his record, I'm quite mixed when it comes to Fred Vasseur and what he did at Alfa Romeo, because yes, he's done very well in the past season with Guan Yu Zhou and Bottas and driving them at the table there when it comes to constructors, but lest we forget the years of stagnation really, which really took over the brand of Alfa Romeo when you had Antonio Giovinazzi, you had Kimi Raikkonen there for seemingly ever, and the team going nowhere aside from down. So I don't know if he's necessarily the silver bullet for Ferrari to make sure that they can improve and get rid of the mistakes and really make the most of that great car, which I've got no doubt they'll once again produce this season. But I think he's a good one. He's a good appointment. But I suppose with one gap being filled, another one opens to go to Alfa Romeo, and this has, for me anyway, to be the biggest shock or surprise when it comes to the chessboard, the musical chairs, if you will, of the team principals, when all of a sudden out of nowhere we saw the former McLaren Andreas Seidel move over to Alfa Romeo, which really shocked me. I don't know about you guys.
Yeah, that one was an absolute blindside really for me. So I'm just surprised that was the choice, and I'm surprised that McLaren, I don't know, that didn't try to keep Andreas Seidel a bit longer, because he has been, a key part of McLaren for so many years. But I guess also from his perspective, McLaren has been a bit of a bit of a wet squib really last year, and it's had its okay moments, but the whole last sort of 3, 4, 5 year saga of McLaren has been one of optimism, but actual recognition of success has been relatively limited. That they're not punching for third, let's face it, even though they've been saying that they want to be. And let us just ignore the McLaren Honda situation before that. So maybe Seidel thinks, well, this is my moment to have some fun doing something else. And given that Alfa Romeo is leaving their sponsorship partner with Sauber, and Sauber's picking up Audi, then I guess for him, looking into the long-term future, this isn't so much as Seidel taking the reins of the Sauber Alfa era. This is him actually picking up the next steps. A bit like Toto Wolff coming into Mercedes and driving that forward. There are these few opportunities when things sort of change and there is a new partnership. So maybe that's actually what Seidel's doing here. But I didn't see it coming, and there's a couple of these team principal changes that I just completely didn't see coming. And maybe that's because we're too reliant on rumours. What do you think?
I think that if we go back to the Seidel one, I think, it completely came out of the blue. But then it makes a lot of sense when you think about it. I think you've got a team in Alfa Romeo who has been middling around in the midfield to the back of the grid for a while now. And a team really that, other than when it had BMW backing, has never really been at the front of the grid. So for them to get in an experienced operator such as Andreas Seidel, who not only... he's not just an F1 man, he has experience in other categories of motorsport. If you're building towards something from 3 years' time, the 2026 project, where they're wanting to have that sort of that build up to that entry of the new regulations that year, I think that it's a great appointment. A really great one in terms of Alfa Romeo's development and how they can possibly build towards that if they want to sort of take themselves seriously. Not that with Fred Vasseur in charge they wouldn't be able to do that, but I think that having Andreas Seidel in that role as the CEO, not the team principal, the team principal now being Mr. Alessandro Aluni Bravi, who worked within the team already and was the managing director of the Sauber Group. It's a fascinating appointment, and yes, it's been hard to keep up with. I can't lie to you. These team principal appointments, I had to look up quickly how many had changed hands recently, and it turns out that in the last 13 months, 6 of the 10 teams have changed team principal, including 4 obviously over the winter. But yes, I think that Seidel is a fascinating appointment, one that sort of we'll probably forget about him, won't we, for a little bit, because we'll forget that he's sort of there working behind the scenes. But I think it's a fascinating appointment. It's interesting to see what rewards it might reap in 2026 and onwards.
I don't know about you guys as well. I always felt that Seidel was perhaps in the shadow of Zach Brown when it came to McLaren. He was very much Zach Brown, that is, the man who's going to go and take all the questions and do the PR stuff and be the face of the panic, if you will. Well, Seidel almost got on with the job, if you will, and created, as we saw in seasons gone by, a very successful car and led that indeed. But as you alluded to earlier, Tristan, it plateaued a bit when it came to McLaren, and they were hit by the change of regulations. I'd say perhaps worse than Mercedes were as well, but perhaps less talked about. And it's quite interesting to see whether Alfa Romeo, being a team, as we say, which is towards the back of the grid, not going that far up the grid seemingly at the moment, whether they've sat him down and said, we'll give you more freedom, more time, more money, a better package overall, and you can drive this team forward. Otherwise, maybe it's one where he decides, I need a new challenge, I need something else, I need to go elsewhere, and Alfa Romeo very much have a vacancy when Fred jumped ship and went to the A-team, if you will. And someone else who's taken a bit of a jump of a ship, shall we say, would be James Vowles when it comes to the former chief strategist of Mercedes going over to Williams. Just when we thought the Andreas Seidel one was the most exciting left field choice when it comes to new paddock appointments and new team principal appointments, we have that one. So Mercedes, I presume have replaced their chief strategist now with somebody else, but James Vowles is now very much out of Toto's shadow and doing his own thing.
Do you think it's a smart choice with James? Well, I don't want to read too much into it, because I feel like that happens quite a lot. And sometimes the changes in teams can just be because an opportunity came up, and for example, Andreas Seidel might well have just left McLaren because he fancied a promotion. That can be a thing. Yeah. But what about James? Do you think it was a matter of James thinking time to get out from the Mercedes safety and do something daring, or do you think it's just a case of fancy a promotion, fantastic opportunity?
Probably a bit of both. I'd say that he's been with Mercedes for a while. We saw them plateau when it comes to last season. The whispers are they're not going to be back to the front of the grid immediately. So maybe he thought to himself, well, I've peaked with Mercedes. I've been, let's say, the right-hand man or part of a team, a well-functioning team, but been under many people before. Now it's time for me to go to somewhere like Williams, which essentially, I see Williams as a bit of a free hit, really, because everyone accepts they're going to be 9th or 10th. So no one's expecting them to go and win races or to get to the final stages of qualifying or to win points every other race. It's very much, if Williams are not last, that is a good season for Williams. And with that in mind, I think he's probably thinking, I'd like a chance to try my hand at being a team principal. And with Williams as well, there's that Mercedes connection. So I don't get the impression that bridges have been burnt between James and Mercedes, but very much he wants to go and be the leader of a team. I mean, we see it in different sports as well, where deputy coaches or coaches in the background when it comes to, let's say, cricket, football, whatever, decide they want to be the team principal, the boss. They want to go and pull the strings, if you will. And I think that's what we're seeing now, really, but he's doing it in quite a tactful and smart, savvy way, I'd say, if I were to become a team principal at some point.
I think this one is the most fascinating appointment of the lot of any team principal. He will be the youngest team principal on the grid at just 43 years old. But don't let that sort of change your opinion, because I think it's quite clear that he's a man with lots of experience. He was there in 2009 as part of the Brawn GP team that won the Constructors' Championship. He was there for all 8? Yeah, all 8 of the Mercedes Constructors' Championship wins. There was talk when he was appointed by Williams that over the last 2 years, he was obviously chief strategist at Mercedes, but Toto Wolff had sort of earmarked him as a possible successor as Mercedes team principal, and hence had been giving him more and more, like up-leveling his skills, so giving him responsibility with the business side of Mercedes, not just the Formula One team, but the automotive corporation. He'd also been rumoured to be involved in lots of driver contracts and other business, so sort of team principal-esque stuff. So he was almost like sort of preparing Vowles that team principal role, and I think it seems to be a case of when James Vowles saw the opportunity of a departure after the departure of Jost Capito, he wanted that role. I think Toto Wolff, despite the fact that he had earmarked Vowles as Mercedes team principal down the line, didn't want to stand in his way. The one interesting subplot from this is you have former Mercedes James Vowles is like probably in the inner circle at Mercedes in the hierarchy. Do you now have Mercedes B team at Williams again? Because you've got former Mercedes man, leading the ship. And obviously his aim will be to drag them up the grid, but it'll be interesting to see the dynamic now between Williams and Mercedes, and if Vowles' appointment there is like Toto Wolff placing a sort of puppeteering the Williams Formula One team again to sort of try and have a hold on what they're doing. But I think it's a really fascinating appointment because, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't recall too many appointments. Andrea Stella's another one at McLaren, which I'm sure we'll get onto, but I don't recall too many appointments where you have a number 2 become a number 1. It's usually a merry-go-round or someone from outside F1, but it'd be interesting to see how he gets on.
But Williams have always been a B team, haven't they? Really? I mean, I can't think of Williams being not related to Mercedes in the last 5 years or so. I don't know about you guys.
Well, related, yeah, but like related as I think is a second cousins rather than a daughter team or that you might expect from Red Bull to AlphaTauri. I think there is a distinction there. I think there is,
that's fair.
And Williams as well. Remember the issue is Williams hasn't been doing very well. When Williams is very independent, it usually comes at the times of relative success, and the Williams partnership leaned very heavily on the very well rated Mercedes engine of 2015, 2016, and let's not forget that engine actually drove people like Lance Stroll into the podium places, and there were these moments of magic with them, but they hid a lot of the underlying issues, and that reliance on the Mercedes engine has, I think, led to this relationship, this very, very close relationship. But there are rumours that Williams looking elsewhere for their engines, along with McLaren as well. I feel like the reason why it's not like a parent sort of child relationship, like Red Bull parent and Alpha Tauri child, is because Williams can jump and run. So can McLaren, for example. So I don't feel like it's that close. But James Vowles is a bizarre and out of the blue choice, but bizarre in a kind of a good way, I think, for me, because it is a merry-go-round. You're right, Angus. We always get the same sort of people moving around the team principals, or in the case of, we're looking at Williams before, we had in Jost Capito, we had an ex racing driver himself, but it doesn't really work. And James has a track record for excellent strategy. I think Mercedes is missing out a big, in a big way actually from James's strategy management. I think they, he's proven himself there, and this could be the feeder series, if you like, into the big teams for team principal. It's funny because I've never really sat down to consider how one makes it into the team principal role, and perhaps James is demonstrating this a little bit with going into Mercedes, getting up the ranks there, and heading up the strategy, and now given this opportunity. So let's face it, if given what he knows about the Mercedes force behind their success, if he can bring just 50-60% of that to Williams and drive them forward in that way, then they would make huge gains. So I think this is a great opportunity for Williams to capitalise on what James knows. And it seems like James has been a pretty forceful manager at times, especially when it comes to the Bottas-Hamilton relationship, but I think a pretty good one.
Yeah, I mean, he's got a track record of success, hasn't he? And perhaps on that latter point there, Tristan, he's looking at how Fred Vasseur stepped out of the Ferrari inner circle, if you will, went to Renault, went to Sauber, did his own thing, took a step back, if you will, when perhaps there's an opportunity to take a step forwards, if you will, in the immediacy when it comes to his career, to then take a step forwards later. So maybe James is thinking, I'll break out from Mercedes, and then perhaps in, let's say, 4, 5, 6 years' time, you may have a McLaren, you may have a Red Bull, you may have even Mercedes, Ferrari, someone saying, we'd like you to go and do a great job because we know what you can do, not only as a team principal, but also in a quote-unquote a big team in a senior role. So a very interesting yet savvy and I'd say strategic move from him, really. So we'll see how it pans out, but you can see the logic in that for sure when it comes to his individual career at least. So not only do we have new team principals in charge of new teams for them at least, we've got new cars as well. We're not too sure how they'll look come the start of this season, although testing is very much ongoing, but we're pretty sure about how all 20 cars will look this season to some degree. At least we had all 10 constructors unveiling their new looks for cars this season. So first of all, Angus, from what you've seen, what's hot and what's not on the paddock?
Hot. I've always been a personal fan of the Red Bull livery. I think the colour scheme with the yellow, red and the blue always works really well. I think the Haas as well, the new sort of MoneyGram livery with the black and the white, I think they've gone very good, very strong with that livery. And my third hot, choosing a lot of them, the Alpine. I think it's the nice touch. I think it's how they got that pink for the first 3 races. And I am a big fan of that. The Ferrari, I'm going to put the not, I think, controversially. I think that red, I don't know. I think there's a bit too much black on that. And I think the red, I won't complain about the red, but the black, there's too much on it. The Aston Martin, I don't know. I'm not so sure personally, having had a first look at it. And then the McLaren, I miss the orange. I think they've gone too little on the orange. So I'm going to, maybe 3 controversial nots there, but those are my hot and not.
Tristan.
Yeah, very good there, Angus. And definitely not hot this year is paint. All the teams have decided that they don't really like paint. Paint weighs quite a lot in Formula One, so hey, if you can strip it down, then absolutely they're going to do that. And I think that's why Mercedes have gone back to the black livery, which I think is very hot, very I think it's one of the best liveries they've done. I really do like Ferrari. I think the Ferrari, just the Ferrari wording on the back of the wing looks fantastic. I know it literally says what it does on the tin. It is a Ferrari. It says Ferrari. Thank goodness for that. I really like it. But often I feel like Ferrari has so much branding. It looks like, for example, like a Santander car with Ferrari sponsorship. And it's nice that they've actually put their logo on it this time and shouted about it. And same with Alfa Romeo. Look, I like black and red and black. Although, weirdly, looking at the polls, it seems like black and red, good. And perhaps, red and black, not so good. So it seems that I'm a bit in minority there. So I really like the Alfa Romeo as well. I think it's really nice. Not so hot. Red Bull, a bit boring. I find the dark blue and the raw carbon colour a little bit jarring. Like they've just forgot to paint it, and rather than integrating it into their livery. I think I had high hopes for the Alpine. I do like it, but I want pink. I want a colourful grid, and for some reason we've forgotten to have colourful grid this year. Welcome to the dark era. And finally, I was disappointed by McLaren as well. Like Angus, I want more colour. I want orange. I miss orange. The papaya, brilliant. But no, we haven't got so much of it. So yeah, for me, I liked the colours, except from the Mercedes. I think the black looks really cool, and it kind of matches their heritage of stripping down the paints of the old cars to get the silver to save weight. Now they're doing it on these cars. Of course, you strip off the paint, you don't get silver for metal, you get bare carbon. So yeah, like the Mercedes a lot.
Yeah, for me, the hots would be Ferrari. I like the classic Ferrari stamp on the back. And Alfa Romeo as well, a very stylish car. One where they've gone in a different direction, where you see other constructors just sort of rolling out the same configuration again and again and again with slight changes, which I fear that Red Bull, or I don't fear Red Bull have done it, Red Bull have definitely done it. And dare I say, Mercedes have done that as well. They've very much thought to themselves, well, okay, silver didn't work out. Silver's a loser's colour from last year, so let's go back to black, and that will go and get the fans on board and make them remember about how good we were. And to be fair, it doesn't look too different from their previous black design, so a tad disappointing on that regard. And in terms of, I suppose, another not as well, not too hot on the Williams either. That seems to be another rehash. So in short, I do like the cars, or I do like the constructors that have a go and do something a bit different, and those who play it safe, boo, quite frankly. And now looking away from how the cars look and how they might end up when it comes to the starting grid in Bahrain, we know that testing's underway, so that the cars have been unveiled are somewhat like what we're going to see. And I suppose the most grabbing thing from what I saw at least is the fact that Mercedes have stuck with their quote-unquote no side pods design, despite that being, let's say, hit and miss and only coming good towards the end of the season. Were you guys surprised by the no side pods design for Mercedes yet again, or not so much?
They've given their car liposuction, haven't they? It's even more no side poddy than the original no side pod design. I think the other thing about the Mercedes design is because it's all black, it hides the contours just a little bit. I'm half expecting Mercedes to eventually roll out 1940s camo style paint so that you can't detect the shape, direction and speed of the car as it's going around. In fact, I wonder if that would be rated legal in F1 if you had like dazzle paint on the cars, as just an aside there, to hide what you're doing. I'm sure there's a reason they don't do that, but wouldn't that be great if someone had like dazzle paint? If you don't know what I'm on about with dazzle paint, look up dazzle paint. You'll see what I mean. But they do it, so you can't really see the cars very well. But as I said at the beginning, just before that tangent there, yeah, they've given them the car a liposuction on for Mercedes, and we don't know how much of this is going to translate into the real car. If I was in their position, I wouldn't necessarily be rolling out my exact aerodynamic designs a week before testing is due to begin, to give you my competitors ample time to sketch out what I've done and replicate it. Looking at you, Aston Martin. How can we start that already? Is that permitted?
Go on.
Yeah, there's already the memes. But it seems to me like they're stuck with the idea, and I did half expect them to roll back on it, given Toto Wolff's comments last year saying that they got it wrong. But clearly they think there is something more to gain out of the giant floor design and tiny side pods. So perhaps this could be it. I still fear their engine cooling and how they're going to get all of that sorted. That Mercedes aren't the first team to roll out a teeny tiny side pod design, very thin rear end. McLaren did it with Honda with the size 0 engine, and look how that went. I had the good fortune of actually being at a race when McLaren Honda was a thing a few years back, and the engine sounded awful, was overheating. So let's hope they haven't got any cooling issues. But to me, it sounds like a natural progression forward, and that's unsurprising now. Last year was the big reveals. This year is just the continuation, the next step. It seems like only really Aston Martin needs to be redesigning their car every 5 or 6 minutes.
Yes, the Mercedes no side pods, the Mercedes car on a diet. It's interesting, isn't it? Like you said, they've accepted that this this design strategy didn't really reap the rewards last year. It only was towards the end where George Russell scored that win in Brazil, which meant that they avoided having a winless season for the first time since 2011. But it's interesting. Maybe, you know what it is, James Vowles has left and they've suddenly lost all sense of idea is what happened. No, I'm joking. It's a strange one. Maybe they've seen something. Maybe they've seen something where they've seen something in the data where they think that if they commit to the idea, it would work. Maybe they have gone on the side of, in a year where the regulations, like you said, Tristan, haven't really changed. It's kind of a transition more than a rip up the rule book. They may have just committed to their design because they feel that it would have been too much effort and too much workload to rip it all up and start again. Perhaps you do get... The idea with regulations is that the first year they produce actually quite a wide gap between the front and the rest, and that kind of happened more and more last year as Red Bull pulled away. But but as time goes on, the gap tends to close up as those who are behind will see what the teams are ahead are doing, and they will catch up, and they will sort of little tricks will filter down throughout the field. So perhaps they're considering that. They might think that it might just close up naturally, and that their design might be one to stick with anyhow. But yeah, it's very interesting to see how it transpires. And yeah, like you said, who copies them? Aston Martin, perhaps. But I mean, Aston Martin will probably want to. Aston Martin will want their own ideas. They got Fernando Alonso in their car now. He wouldn't let them do something like. Well, actually, maybe he would. Maybe he's the kind of person to want to make them copy their design. But yeah, interesting approach from Mercedes at the moment. See if will it pay dividends? I'm not sure. Perhaps if we want a competitive field.
Yeah, I think Fernando Alonso wouldn't mind how he got a competitive car as long as he got it, really. But more of that later, no doubt. In terms of the no side pods look, should I say, in terms of Mercedes, it's a gamble, isn't it? Because we saw it come good at the end of the season, but that's only when perhaps engineering and changes and developments on different constructors, namely Red Bull and Ferrari were slowing down, that the Mercedes became better. There were designs that improved them. They became closer to those top two constructors than previous, where they were third by default because no one could catch them. But I hear rumour as well they're considering, or they've got at least theoretically designed, a plan B. So if this no side pods look doesn't work out, they will be able to roll out essentially a completely different car, similar to Aston Martin come the mid-season. But you've got to think to yourself, if the no side pods look doesn't work and they have to go to option B, that means another season down the drain. That means perhaps another third in the constructors. That means more disgruntlement for Hamilton and for George Russell and for everybody involved, and Red Bull once again getting more money, getting more success, getting, I suppose, another season of at least fighting for the top two, or indeed winning both championships again. So it's quite clear they think they're onto something. Who am I to go and say Mercedes don't know what they're doing after their years of success? But I think they're playing quite a gamble-riddled game, really, where we saw what happened previously in terms of the no side pod look. We saw that everybody else is going for a more Red Bull, Ferrari akin look where you have massive side pods. So we'll know, I believe, in the first 2 or 3 races whether this is a good gamble or a bad gamble. But they're very much put all their eggs in one basket, and it seems that they know what they're doing and they want to stick with this. But another season of, let's be fair, failure by Mercedes standards, of only a handful of wins, only being competitive by sort of the mid-season, is, dare I say, not acceptable for that sort of team, because they've got 2 excellent world-class drivers at their disposal. They've got an incredible team principal as well. They've got a team that knows how to win and is addicted to winning. And you think, if this carries on, and what I mean by this is, if a season of non-competitivity come the sort of, until the mid-season carries on, then you do question what happens to many people there, whether they go elsewhere, whether they jump ship. Maybe James thought to himself, well, if we're sticking with the no side pods look, then I'll go elsewhere. Maybe to spin another conspiracy theory in the mix, maybe that's why he left. But we'll see. But interesting that they've gone for this one. I wasn't expecting them to be so cast iron with this, for sure. Yeah.
The biggest thing for me, right, and looking at the cars, and I'm glad we're talking about the design of them, because do you remember last year I was very excited for Alpine? Well, this year I'm very excited for Alpine. They've got a really, really different car. Well, the car they unveiled was very, very different to last year's. They've remodeled loads of it. They've remodeled the fronts. It's got a really wide front wing. It's got a completely different rear suspension layout. The side pods are completely different as well. It has like a really flat top, and it has like a black bar going down the back that reminds me of the old sort of Formula 3 style cars when they used to have the sticky out air intake, I think, on the side. It reminds me of that, and it has loads of holes in it. But I'm really excited for Alpine. It seems like they've really spent time developing their car and progressing it forward in a way that Mercedes has sprung theirs forward. I feel like Alpine as well had a bit of a different style, and they've sprung theirs forward as well. And this could be really, really good for Alpine, because it would be nice if they were back into the top 3. So if you have a few spare minutes and you fancy taking a look at what Alpine's doing, I definitely would recommend it, because their car looks very, very cool, very, very different as well, very flat. And again, this is just another design theory that we've got now within the sport. I would argue. Well, last year we had 4, didn't we? Because Aston Martin had their own design, which they quickly abandoned. But now we've got the Ferrari-esque designs. We've got the Mercedes, and then finally we've got the Alpine, and then we'll find out how everyone else's fits into that as well. But I'm, as a counter, very, very excited for Alpine because this could be a really good moment for them.
And testing is getting underway this week. Who are we looking at then, aside from Mercedes and by extension Alpine, as to how they do for good or for ill? Who do we think could have a rather decisive testing, shall we say, come the next few days at least?
I'm interested to see how Ferrari gets on. I think that we're always promised big things. I feel like the classic build-up to an F1 season is seeing how Ferrari gets on. And either the combination, especially the last few years of, 1, will they be able to live up to the hype? And 2, will they be able to deliver on any promise which they show? And promise often comes from pre-season testing. I remember, was it 2019, I think, when Mercedes wiped the floor with the field that year. But in testing, Ferrari are about 2 seconds quicker than Mercedes. And everyone said, wow, Ferrari are looking good. And then they turned up in Melbourne. They finished 4th and 5th, 1 minute behind. So I think it's going to be fascinating to see how Ferrari gets on in those initial tests. I also think Aston Martin, to be honest, is one that comes to mind. I'm intrigued to see. Fernando Alonso has joined a team which came 7th in the Constructors last year, and he said that they are the best. He was saying along the lines of they were the best team outside the top 3 teams to be able to win a world championship in the next couple of years. Now, if you looked at Aston Martin last year, you wouldn't necessarily believe him, but he's a smart man. He has possibly seen something. And Aston Martin's car did pick up towards the second half of last year. So it'll be very interesting to see if that momentum is carried on. It'll be also interesting to see, I think, on a smaller point, just to slip in a little bit of news, see how Mr. Felipe Drugovich gets on. Because Lance Stroll
Nicely
had
segued.
his... Lance Stroll had a cycling accident before in the last couple of days. Of course, we wish him a speedy recovery from any injuries he has. But his participation in the opening race in Bahrain in 2 weeks' time is currently in doubt. So it'd be very interesting to see how Drugovich, the F2 champion, will. He's Aston Martin's official reserve driver anyhow, or one of them. And it'd be interesting to see how he gets on in what will be his second test run, I think, in an F1 car, because he did possibly the practice sessions or the young drivers test last year. But yeah, those are my 2 for me, Ferrari and Aston Martin, for varying reasons.
Tom, what about you? Who are you going to have a beady eye on across the 23rd to the 25th of February?
Ooh, I must say, Alfa Romeo are a team that I have a good feeling about. I think they're one to watch. Potentially a dark horse to break into, I suppose, the top 5 maybe. I won't go any further than that, but I look at the driver pairing they have. I look at Bottas, a man who's been there now, coming into his 2nd season. You've got Guan Yu Zhou, who is a very capable driver, also has a lot of money behind him as well. So for me, that's almost the perfect balance ticket, really, for a midfield team who's aspiring to break in to further. And then you've got Andreas Seidel as well, who's come over from McLaren, who, yes, he's not had a perfect record, shall we say, with developing cars, but he's certainly been able to build them up again after the doldrums that were the sort of Honda era with Stoffel Van Dorn and Fernando Alonso as well. He can't take all the credit, of course, but he can take a large portion of it, owing to how well that car did. A car that nearly won a race, let's we forget as well, with Lando Norris at the helm at Sochi, I believe, before that was unfortunately banned. So yes, they're a team I'm looking at for all different reasons. I like the car, I like the drivers, I like the setup. I think they could go places, really, and I see them as being a team who's wanting to break away from being the Ferrari B model. Okay, they're not a B team like Alpha Tauri are, but they very much are related to Ferrari in terms of the setup there. I think they're pulling away from that in terms of they now have free reign over their driver selection in years gone by, and they're now sort of going in their own direction. So excited for them more than anybody else. In terms of the top teams, I always think it's very hard to judge because the team that does very well in testing has a very good car, but then again, there's always somebody else. There's always another team there that's giving them a great deal of competition, so it doesn't really translate that much. But Williams, I guess, would be another one as well. I think with Logan Sargent coming in as well, I think that'll be an interesting one to see how he does. Not to mention there Alex Albon as well, having another season under his belt with that team, and the new team principal we spoke about as well. So yeah, what about you, Tristan? Are you
Tom,
similar with us?
You just named them all, apart from you missed our hats. I've got my eye on all of them.
I mean, I mentioned two. I mentioned two, but go for it.
Sorry, Tom. Well, I've got my eye on the back markers, and I don't want to link this because I don't want to make Pierre Gasly sound like a back marker. I've got my eye on the back markers. Independently from that, I've got my eye on Pierre Gasly, and the Alpine. I've already said why I'm looking at Alpine, interestingly, and in our Formula One fantasy, which we'll be setting up very, very soon, and you can all join, I will be putting Alpine into that, and I look forward to reaping my rewards, which if it's anything like last year, there won't be many rewards. But Pierre Gasly has had a very rocky time in Formula One, from being in Alpha Tauri, and then his brief stint in Red Bull, and then back to AlphaTauri, and now he's got his opportunity to be in a French car, and he'll be with Esteban Ocon, which is an interesting pairing. They've said they get on. Do you believe them?
Professionally, I think it's cordial, but I don't think it goes beyond see you Sunday, mate.
Yeah, I look forward to the YouTube videos of them both doing fun activities together, because I don't know, I think the atmosphere may not be so great. It might not be a bromance like I think the team would like to portray. So Pierre Gasly, I'm really interested to see whether or not he can extract a lot out of the car, whether or not he gets on with the car, and whether or not he can get over his own mental block, which I'm not making that up. Drive to Survive and other interviews with Pierre suggests that he suggests within it that he has his own mental block. So it'd be really interesting to see how he has progressed actually. And for me, the ones I'm watching are Haas and Williams. Everyone else is going to be okay, but Haas and Williams have had such a poor couple of years. Now Haas did have those moments of magic last year, but for a lot of the season they didn't score any points. And Williams, again, a couple of moments of magic, a couple of moments of luck. Let's not forget Alex Albon scoring a point in Australia by not pitting till the very end. But I want to see whether or not this extra money, whether or not these rules, which are supposed to help teams at the back, are actually helping the teams at the back. And that's going to be really important. You've already mentioned Logan Sargent, so I'll keep that one short. But I think what we want to be seeing is the teams at the back just pulling closer to the ones at the front to give us we want more moments of magic. We want more opportunities for someone like Kevin Magnussen to be able to get pole position. That was incredible last year. Absolutely one of the better. I rate it as my best moment of the year. And close to that, Nico Hülkenberg, let's face it, the man's gone out the sport and without ever getting on the podium, and now coming back in with Haas, he's going to be wanting this as well. So, yeah, the two back markers, Haas and Williams, so the interchangeable back markers over the last sort of 4 or 5 years, that's going to be my eye, along with Alpine. Maybe I'm low-key becoming an Alpine supporter. McLaren's still my team, but I don't know, McLaren's been a difficult team to follow for a very long time.
Yeah, I think Oscar Piastri as well, to add another name. Be interesting to see how he does, more generally speaking, because there's a lot of talk about him, obviously, and he was prized away from Alpine, came kicking and screaming out of there. Comes with a lot of hype around him, but with hype, you always need to fulfill that, obviously, because the spotlight's on you greater than ever. So I don't think we'll see that in testing, but definitely want to watch more generally. I think the Drive to Survive, I suppose, episode or segment on him could be quite interesting, because I imagine he's quite a character who likes to make his feelings known for good or for ill. But we'll see. Maybe I'm misjudging him there. I never spoke to the fella, of course, so I can't comment. But yeah,
well, Drive Survive comes out on the 24th, I think, which from time of recording is on this Friday. Of course, if you're listening back way in the future, then this Friday won't make any sense. But 24th of February, you're right. And Max Verstappen's going to be featured on it this time.
Yes,
he's finally got that got the negotiations down. Given that, I think last time he refused because they started making things up, which I think is pretty fair, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those. Drive to Survive for me is a fine blend of, or it should be at least, entertainment but factual content. And at times, I think they went more for the entertainment side of things, which I get, but
Yes, Drive to Survive does make a few things up, but you have to remember, I think it does try to tap in. Whilst I'm a bit sceptical of its means, it does tap into a generation of Formula One fans, and it has engaged a whole load of people. It's engaged America, which people had failed to do for a long, long time who are running Formula One. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see the next series, see what's in there. I think it'd be particularly heartwarming. There better be a whole episode on just the Brazilian Grand Prix and Haas's pole position there. Surely there has to be. Is there? There has to be. That's an incredible story.
There
has to be. Well done.
Yeah, I think there will be, because they've shared they've actually shared the names of the episodes ahead of time, and there almost certainly is a Haas one on there. But anyway, because it was such a big point. Will you have your eye on the Lewis Hamilton and George Russell during testing? Because I seem to remember, looking back at testing last year, Hamilton always plays it a bit slower, apart from that one turn for the year when Mercedes came out and they were just miles ahead of anyone, and they were surprised by that. But after that, we tend to get this Mercedes like, we're only 8th in the grid, what are we gonna do? And then in the first race, they absolutely bliss for everyone.
Yeah, I will be looking at that, not only in testing, but also more broadly speaking. I think now we've got a season where everyone's used to the regulations, everyone is used to Mercedes being perhaps not as smooth as they were previously, and everyone knows what George Russell is about. He's no longer, I suppose, the wild card or the new kid on the block, shall we say. He's very much established. It's now up to Hamilton, really, to bring his A game, because I can't believe I'm saying this, I often forget, but George Russell beat him. A Mercedes teammate of Lewis Hamilton, a teammate of any team that Lewis Hamilton is in, beat him convincingly. And you can only put that down to the regulation change, to porpoising, to XYZ excuse so much, really. So one to look at throughout the season, not only at testing, I'd say.
Yeah, I think that you know what I'm going to say? I think the pressure is on Russell a bit more this season, in all honesty, because we know what he can do. He can beat, if we were being a bit over dramatic about it, he beat the greatest driver of all time in his first season in a top team. Some might say that. He's got to arguably back it up, and I'm not saying he's not capable of backing it up, but I feel like Hamilton will be on a mission this year. Hamilton is 38 years old or something, but he's still very good. He's still a very good driver, and it'd be fascinating to see how George Russell. I'm going to call him George Russell. I keep calling him George in the past, but I'm not. I do not know him. Since you see how George Russell gets on this year. Second season syndrome is something that's often touted in sport as something where somebody could have a very high first season, brilliant performance, overperforming against expectations, and the second season, people suss them out, they know them, and their performance level drops. I don't think we'll see that, because Russell, again, is clearly a very good performer. He's clearly very comfortable in that Mercedes team. But I think, Hamilton could come back with a vengeance. And I know I feel like I was saying that for most of last year, saying, well, Hamilton's going to come back with a vengeance anytime soon. Well, Hamilton, this race might be his time to come back with a vengeance. But I think that this year, I feel like Hamilton knows, I know he's about to sign a new contract, probably, after this year, but I feel like he knows his time in the sport is coming to more of a close than it ever has been. Yeah. So he'll want to make the most of those opportunities, especially if this Mercedes no side pod car is actually quick this year.
And just before we move on as well, I just want to highlight that for our UK listeners, that testing is on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. Every day is 7 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. in the afternoon. So you should be able to watch it, I think. Unlike last time when they did 2 testings and one of them was closed and the other one was broadcast. So it is a week before the actual first Grand Prix in Bahrain, and we won't actually be able to watch this testing. So excited. We're actually going to have F1 content, real F1 content. Wait, do we count? Yeah, additional F1 content this week as well. So that's your times for you: 7 to 4:30 p.m. Thursday the 23rd to the Saturday 25th. Not that I think most people tune into the whole thing, because that would be very long. And
I won't be. Sorry, guys. Sorry to let the team down, but no, I won't be doing that.
No. Highlights exist for a reason.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And now, before we wrap up our first episode of this new season of F1 in Review, we're pivoting now to look at the FIA, and it seems they've backtracked on their earlier rule to outlaw political, religious and personal statements without prior consent from that governing body. They've done this via a guidance note, they're calling it, and in short it means that drivers are now free to say what they want everywhere aside from during pre- and post-race events and on track as well. So let's say Thursday, Wednesday, in their own homes they can say something, Monday, Tuesday, it's fine, but when they're in the F1 bubble as such, they're restricted in terms of what they say, in short. Our thoughts on this then, in terms of this, let's say, battle that's been going on between the drivers and the governing body, quietly simmering away during the off-season?
Yes, the free speech debacle, I think it's fair to say. It's interesting how in our sport, they are putting such a limit on free speech and not getting drivers to be able to say their views. And it's always been an interesting topic in terms of the barrier or the non-barrier, whatever you may feel, between sport and politics. And we've had drivers in recent years. I think some people say sport and politics should never mix, but I've always been of the opinion that they are linked, because sporting events can occur in political context in terms of the countries they're being staged in, but also they can overlap, because at the end of the day, holding sporting projects and big sporting events costs a lot of money, and that breaches into this political sphere. And also there's been with the increase of social media, there's been a increase as well of drivers being able to feel more comfortable in broadcasting their opinions, because they have their own platform where they're not constrained by a team or a other organisation. They can say it from their own platform. And it's definitely become more prominent in F1 the last couple of years. Since COVID times, I think it was kind of the birth of it was from 2020, when we had the awful brutal police murder of George Floyd in the United States, and it led to drivers not just voicing their viewpoints, using their platform on that issue, but other issues. You've seen Sebastian Vettel was especially vocal on environmental issues in his final year of F1 racing last year. I'm sure he'll continue to be. And the FIA pontificates on this "we racers one" view, and saying that everyone is welcome and everyone is able to take part in Formula One, participate, be a fan, etc., etc., and also people should be able to express their viewpoints. And yet they're now shutting down people for those viewpoints. I think the fact they've had to backtrack on their original stance really shows that they've kind of gone down the wrong route completely. The original statement they had basically suggested that a driver could never make a statement, even on their own personal social media page, which was politically relevant, because then they'd risk being banned at driving, and that is a ridiculous culling of free speech. They've now rolled back on that, because you had drivers, rightly so, like Lando Norris saying it's ridiculous, Lewis Hamilton saying, I don't care, mate, I'm going to say what I want anyway. And the FIA has kind of realised that yes, their powers to do anything was pretty small. And it's never a good look for an organisation when they have to row back so quickly on something they've said. Especially when the president of said organisation recently had his own comments scrutinised when he'd made historic sexist comments. All in all, a very bad look for the FIA and for Mohammed Ben Sulayem. And at the end of the day, sports people should be allowed to have these views, in my opinion. So why not let them have them? It's not been handled well at all, to be honest. It'd be interesting to get your thoughts from you guys as well.
Thanks, Angus. That's an excellent, I think, summary of my thoughts, and I think Tom shares them too. So I'll be very quick. It's a nonsense memo. It talks about how you can't express these views on the track or anything like that. It has to be in your personal space. And to be honest, I mean, what counts then? If I walk onto the track with a cross around, on a chain for religious reasons, does that count? Because that's on my personal space, around my neck, but it's also on track. So, do I count? What about fans as well? Are fans allowed to comment on political views as well? And what happens if I'm a fan and I yell a question at Hamilton and Hamilton responds to that and it's a political one? Does that mean he's then expressed the view through solidarity? What happens if the FIA accidentally let something slip through and don't disagree with it? Well, do they agree by solidarity and things like that? There is so much context to this. It's a ridiculous memo. The idea that you can only do something in your private space, but not on the track, is bizarre to me. Does Mercedes livery get banned now? Because they originally did the black livery, as you said, for the Black Lives Matter movement. So where's the cutoff with that? And if it is arbitrary, then what's to stop them banning Mercedes? What's it to stop them banning lots of things? It's, as I say, it's a nonsense memo. It's not within, there aren't any boundaries to it. It's basically FIA deems this to be okay or not. It says, it has lots of things about prior approval. You're only allowed to make statements and other actions with prior approval. So there you go. We'll bow to our FIA overlords when they deem things to be correct. That's not how it works. You don't get to have freedom of speech with prior approval. Okay, that's not necessarily what I would construct as a freedom. So I think it's nonsense. I don't think they'll be able to uphold it. And I'm glad a lot of the drivers were speaking out of this at the press conferences. Max Verstappen, Lewis Hamilton, two that I can think of the top of my head, said this is nonsense. I think it's nonsense as well. The FIA needs to step back on this one because it's just absolutely bizarre to me that they are deciding to die on this hill. Get off the hill.
I can only echo those words, really. Messy and pointless are the way I would describe this affair, really. I get the whole idea of we've got to go and focus on the sport more than anything else, but the drivers aren't robots. If they want to go and say something or want to go and do something, they're the people who bring the money in. They've got every right, in my view, to go and express their feelings because they're human beings. They're the people who essentially put their own lives at risk in many ways, jetting all around the world to places they perhaps don't want to go to. So why shouldn't they be able to have a cross around their neck or have a rainbow flag around their neck or wear a certain t-shirt or express certain views? It doesn't mean that's necessarily the view of Formula One. That is just the view of that driver. So I don't really understand why they're so concerned by drivers speaking out, because I think we're past the point now where sportsmen are just seen as sportsmen only, because they're human beings, not only that, but you can't go and have a situation where you have politicians saying, for example, oh, well, we're politicians, we can focus on sport if we want when England are doing rather well in the World Cup or when George Russell is winning a race, but, another sportsman talking about a political issue, you can't do that, you can only focus on sport. You can't have it both ways, really, and I think with the FIA meddling in politics in times as well, they can't then go and say, well, do as we say, not as we do. So, messy and pointless. I mean, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. It could have been handled so much better than this, and it comes at a time where, in my mind, the FIA still haven't rebuilt their reputation fully from the debacle of Michael Massey and that whole season as well. So when they needed really to be keeping their mouths shut and just doing what they're meant to be doing, officiating correctly, they're opening up a can of worms needlessly, really. So I don't get it. Don't really get it. So we're back, and like that, the first episode of F1 in Review when it comes to the season is done and dusted. Thank you very much for listening all the way to the end of this one, be that on your preferred podcast provider or via River Radio, be that live or via the Listen Back feature as well. You can follow us on Twitter and indeed TikTok, our handle being F1 in Review. We'll have short videos going up, we'll have episodes once they're posted on the podcast provider of your choice going up as well as retweeting some of the biggest news that happens when we're not recording an episode. So do of course follow that account, it is worth your while, I promise you. We'll be back next week as well. Of course, we'll be discussing what we know from the pre-season testing and how this may translate into the upcoming season, or how it may not translate into the upcoming season. But until next time, thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you, as I say, next week.